I never reported what happened that night, but it still follows me. My name is Marcus Delaney, and I have worked as a correctional officer at Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia for 17 years. When they converted Cell Block 7 into emergency COVID isolation in March of 2020, I thought I'd seen everything this place could throw at me. I was wrong. The shift has started like any other lockdown rotation. 23 hours confined, 1 hour rec time in shifts, all movement logged and monitored. Cell Block 7 housed 14 inmates that week, mostly pre-trial detainees waiting for court dates that kept getting pushed back. The block was old, built in 1829, with stone walls 3 feet thick and iron doors that screamed when they moved. Around 9 p.m., I was doing my first walkthrough, checking that everyone had received their dinner trays. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that institutional yellow glow that makes everything look sick. I counted cells as I walked. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When I reached cell 7, I stopped. The inmate inside, a guy named Torres, was sitting on his bunk facing the wall. His lips were moving, but I couldn't hear anything through the door's observation slot. I tapped on the steel with my flashlight. Torres, you good? He didn't turn around. His lips kept moving in that same silent rhythm. I logged it as unusual behavior and moved on. By the time I reached cell 14, I'd forgotten about it. 2 hours later, Officer Chen radioed me from the monitoring station. Her voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Delaney, you need to see this footage. I walked back to the station where she had the security feed pulled up on 3 monitors. Cell 7 was on the center screen. Torres was still facing the wall, still moving his lips, but on the thermal camera, his shadow on that wall was moving independently. It shifted and stretched while Torres sat perfectly still. Equipment malfunction, I said, but my voice sounded thin. Chen shook her head. She rewound the footage and played it again. This time I watched closely. Torres's shadow raised its arms, while Torres himself didn't move at all. The shadow's head tilted at an angle that would have broken a human neck. I'm checking on him, I said. When I reached cell 7, Torres had turned around. He was facing the door now, sitting cross-legged on his bunk. His eyes were open but unfocused, looking past me at something I couldn't see. His lips were still moving. I unlocked the observation slot and leaned closer. He was speaking backwards. The words were English. I was certain of that, but they came out in reverse. It took me a moment to understand what I was hearing. My brain kept trying to flip the sounds around to make sense of them. Then I realized he was repeating the same phrase over and over. They want their names back. They want their names back. They want their names back. But backwards. Every syllable inverted, I called for medical. While I waited, I checked the other cells. In cell 8, an inmate named Davidson sat in the exact same position as Torres, cross-legged, facing the door, speaking backwards. Cell 9, same thing. A woman named Park, same position, same backward speech. By the time the medical team arrived, 7 inmates in cell block 7 were doing it, all of them speaking in perfect unison, all of them in that same backwards cadence. The doctor, a tired-looking woman named Patel, examined Torres through the door slot. She asked him questions. He didn't respond, just kept speaking those reversed words. She ordered immediate psychiatric evaluation for all 7. While we waited for the psych team, I noticed something on Torres's arm. He'd pushed up his sleeve, and there were marks on his inner forearm. Fresh cuts, shallow but deliberate, forming some kind of symbol. I couldn't make it out clearly through the door slot. Dr. Patel, I said quietly. His arm. She looked. Her face went pale. She pulled out her phone and took a photo through the slot, then moved to the next cell. Davidson had the same marks, same symbol, same placement, same depth. Cell by cell, we checked. All 7 inmates had carved identical symbols into their skin. Dr. Patel pulled me aside. Her hands were shaking. I need to see the archive records, she said, the old execution records. It took us 40 minutes to find them in the basement storage, files from 1873 to 1953, when Pennsylvania stopped executing prisoners. Dr. Patel flipped through yellow pages until she found what she was looking for. The symbol was there, sketched in old ink on a coroner's report from 1896. 7 men executed on the same day for the same crime. The report noted unusual markings found on their bodies, symbols they'd carved into themselves before they died. The same symbols now on the inmates in cell block 7. I don't work that block anymore. They moved me to the north wing after what happened next. None of the 7 inmates remember carving those marks. They don't remember speaking backwards. The psychiatric reports say synchronized psychotic break, mass hysteria triggered by isolation stress. But I've seen the footage they won't release. The thermal imaging from that night. All 7 shadows moving while the inmates sat still. All 7 shadows reaching toward each other through solid stone walls, their thermal signatures bleeding together into something that didn't look human anymore. Cell block 7 is empty now. They sealed it off, citing structural concerns. But sometimes, during night shift, I hear it, that backward speech, echoing from behind those 3-foot walls. They want their names back. I never reported what I understood that night, how the 7 executed men from 1896 had the same inmate numbers as the 7 in cell block 7, how the numbers had been randomly assigned during intake, how random assignment shouldn't be possible across 124 years. The archive records are missing now. Dr. Patel transferred to another facility. Officer Chen quit. I still work here. I still hear them sometimes, speaking backwards through stone walls that should make that impossible. And every night, I check my own arms for marks I don't remember making. There's a sound beneath death row we're never supposed to acknowledge. I know what happens when you do. My name is Vincent Broussard, and I have worked as a psychiatric evaluator at Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola for 12 years. Angola sits on 18,000 acres of former plantation land, right where the Mississippi bends. The locals still call parts of it cursed ground. After what I witnessed during the 2020 lockdown, I understand why, when COVID hit, we went to full isolation protocols. 23-hour lockdown, meals through slots, psychiatric evaluations conducted through reinforced glass. Death row went completely silent. No rec time, no movement, no human contact except through intercom and camera. The first call came on April 9th, 2020, 3 a.m. An inmate named Marcus Webb in cell D 14. The night officer said Webb was screaming about water. I pulled up the camera feed. Webb stood pressed against his cell door, both hands flat against the steel, head tilted most like he was listening to something. I activated the intercom. Webb, this is Dr. Broussard. What's wrong? He didn't acknowledge me. He kept his head tilted, listening. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. The river. It's under the floor. Can't you hear it? I checked the maintenance logs. No plumbing issues, no water leaks. The cell was on the second floor of the death house, concrete and steel throughout. There was no river anywhere near that block. Webb, there's no water, I said carefully. You're having an anxiety response to isolation. I can arrange. It has names, he interrupted. So many names. They're all drowning down there. The call ended. I logged it as isolation-induced psychosis and scheduled a follow-up for morning. By morning, 6 more inmates on death row were reporting the same thing, the river under the floor. All of them heard it. All of them said it was calling names. I spent that day doing back-to-back evaluations through the glass. Each inmate described identical auditory hallucinations, running water beneath their cells, voices mixed with the current, names being called out in alphabetical order. By day 3, it was 14 inmates, all on death row, all hearing the same impossible river. The warden brought in acoustic engineers. They set up sensitive recording equipment in the corridor outside the cells, microphones designed to detect sounds humans can't hear. The engineers spent 6 hours running tests. What they found made no sense. There were vibrations beneath the cell block, rhythmic pulses traveling through the concrete foundation. The pattern didn't match any geological activity. It didn't match water flow or mechanical systems. It didn't match anything in their reference database, but it did match something, a human heartbeat, except impossibly slow, 1 beat every 11 seconds. The engineers left. Their report was classified. The warden ordered me to increase psychiatric medication for all affected inmates. On day 7, Marcus Webb stopped eating. He sat in the center of his cell, directly on the concrete floor, listening. When I spoke to him through the intercom, he answered without looking at the camera. It said my name, he whispered, 3 times now. When it says it the 4th time, I go down. Marcus, there's nothing under your cell but foundation and earth. Then why can I hear names I never knew? Names from before this place was a prison. Names in French, in Choctaw. Names that drowned when this was still a bend in the river. I had no answer. Day 9. The vibrations got stronger, strong enough that officers walking the corridor reported feeling them through their boots. Strong enough that water in coffee cups rippled with each pulse. Marcus Webb began speaking in languages he'd never learned. The guards recorded him. We had the audio analyzed. French Creole from the 1800s, Choctaw phrases that hadn't been spoken in over a century, names, always names. Then, on day 11, the water appeared. A maintenance worker found it during routine rounds. Cell D-18, water pooling in the center of the floor, even though the cell was completely dry when checked 2 hours earlier. The water was cold, river cold. It smelled like mud and rot. They sealed the cell. The inmate inside, a man named Garrison, stood in the water up to his ankles. He was smiling. "It's time," he said calmly. "The river wants me back." Security pulled him out. They drained the cell. The floor was intact. No cracks, no leaks, no explanation for where the water came from. That night, Marcus Webb drowned. They found him at 4:17 a.m. during routine cell check. He was lying on his back in the center of his cell, 3 inches of water covering his face. His eyes were open. His mouth was open. His lungs were full of river water. The cell was sealed. The sink had been disconnected during previous maintenance. There was no water source. No pipes ran through that section of floor. But Marcus Webb drowned anyway. The medical examiner found sediment in his lungs. Mississippi River sediment, the same composition found 200 yards away where the river bent closest to the prison. They sealed death row for 48 hours, brought in structural engineers, hydrologists, everyone who might explain it. The water kept appearing, cell after cell, always at night, always river cold. By the time they reopened the block, 11 inmates had been transferred to psychiatric facilities. The remaining 3 refused to leave their bunks. They said the river knew where they slept. Touching the floor meant going under. I don't work death row anymore. They transferred me to general population after I started hearing it too. That slow pulse through the concrete, those names rising from below. Angola was built on plantation land where they used to work slaves until they died. The old-timers say thousands drowned trying to escape across the river, that the Mississippi holds more names than any cemetery. I've read the geological surveys now, the ones they keep locked away. Beneath the prison, 40 feet down, there's an underground aquifer, water that's been trapped there since before the prison was built. Water that moves with that same impossible pulse. They found something else in those surveys. Carved stones, hundreds of them, buried in the aquifer sediment. Each stone has a name. I still do evaluations. But now, late at night, when the facility is quiet, I press my hand against the floor of my office. I feel that slow, patient pulse. And sometimes, in the space between heartbeats, I hear the river calling names. It hasn't said mine yet. Yet. I didn't believe in the dead returning until one of them asked me for help. My name is Sarah Kimball, and I have worked as a correctional officer at Attica Correctional Facility in upstate New York for 9 years. Everyone who works here knows the history. 1971. The uprising. 43 people dead, but history is supposed to stay in the past. It's supposed to stay buried in memorial plaques and documentary footage. It didn't. The lockdown started in March of 2020. Full isolation, no visitors, no programs, no group rec time, just cells and silence and the slow erosion of routine. By May, the tension was suffocating. You could feel it in the air, thick and electric, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. The count day happens every night at 3 a.m. We walk the tiers, verify every inmate is in their assigned cell, mark them present on the log. It's the quietest hour in the facility. Most inmates are asleep. The ones who aren't usually lie still, waiting for us to pass. On May 7th, 2020, I drew night count duty for C Block. Officer Hayes took D Block. We started our rounds at 2:57 a.m. I walked C Block's main tier, flashlight in one hand, tablet for logging in the other. The cells were dark. I could hear breathing, the occasional snore, the rustle of blankets. Normal sounds, familiar sounds. Cell C-012, present. Cell C-013, present. Cell C-014, empty. I stopped, checked the tablet. Inmate Ramos, present at 9 p.m. count. No movement logged since then. No transfers, no medical emergencies. I radioed Hayes. C Block, cell 14 showing empty. You seeing anything unusual? Static. Then, D Block is, Sarah, you need to see this. His voice sounded wrong, tight, scared. I found him on D Block's second tier, standing motionless in the corridor. His flashlight hung loose in his hand, the beam pointed at the floor. Hayes? He pointed down the tier. Every cell door was open, not broken open, not forced, just standing wide, like someone had unlocked them all at once. But inside each cell, an inmate sat on their bunk, perfectly still, perfectly upright, all of them facing the same direction, all of them with their eyes open. I counted 32 inmates visible from where we stood, 32 sets of eyes, staring at the same empty point in space, not blinking, not moving. Hayes, call it in. He didn't move. I grabbed my own radio. Before I could key it, they spoke. All 32 inmates spoke in perfect unison, same words, same inflection, same hollow cadence. They're here for count. My blood went cold. Who's here? I managed. Silence. Then, still in unison, the warden wants us ready. I've worked corrections long enough to know when something is performance and when it's real. This was real. These men weren't coordinating. They weren't communicating. They were responding to something we couldn't see. I approached the nearest cell. Inmate named Jackson, 42 years old, in for armed robbery, 7 years into a 15-year sentence. I'd spoken to him hundreds of times. He was quiet, kept to himself, read library books about astronomy. Now he sat rigid on his bunk, staring past my shoulder at nothing. Jackson, I said carefully, talk to me. His lips moved. The warden wants us in formation. What warden? The one in the gray suit, the one from before. Before what? I wanted to ask. But Hayes grabbed my arm. The cameras, he whispered. We went to the security station. The night supervisor, Officer Brooks, sat staring at the monitor wall. 64 screens showing feeds from across the facility. On every screen showing D Block, the image was wrong. The inmates sat in their cells. We could see them clearly, but standing in the corridor, visible on every camera, was a figure we couldn't see with our own eyes. A man in a gray suit. He walked slowly down the tier, stopping at each cell. The inmates' heads turned to follow him as he passed. On screen, we watched him pause at cell D-09, look inside, and make a mark on something he carried. A clipboard, maybe. We couldn't see it clearly through the grainy footage. Brooks rewound the feed. He showed up at 2:53, he said quietly, 4 minutes before count was scheduled. We watched the recording. The figure in gray appeared at the entrance to D Block, stepping into frame like he'd walked through a door that wasn't there. He moved methodically, cell by cell, checking each occupant. On the audio feed, we heard him speak. His voice was thin, distant, like it was coming from very far away. Prepare for count. Remain in your assigned cell. Do not move until cleared. Word for word, those were the instructions from the Attica riots. September 13th, 1971, the day the National Guard retook the prison, the day the shooting started, the last words Warden Vincent Mancusi spoke before 43 people died. Turn off the cameras, I said. Brooks looked at me like I was insane. Turn them off, now. He killed the feeds. The monitors went dark. We stood in the sudden silence, listening to our own breathing. Then we went back to D Block. The cell doors were closed, locked. Every inmate was lying down, apparently asleep. When I checked Jackson's cell, he was under his blanket, eyes closed, breathing steady. I checked the duty log. The system showed us completing a count at 3:04 a.m., 7 minutes ago, according to the timestamp. None of us remembered walking the tier. None of us remembered marking inmates present, but the log was complete, every cell accounted for. Hayes found the footage later. We weren't supposed to look, but we did. The recording showed us walking D Block at exactly 3 a.m., moving cell to cell, marking our tablets. We looked normal. We acted normal. But in every frame, just behind us, the figure in gray followed. On the audio, you can hear him counting 1, 2, 3, 4, marking each inmate, his voice layered under ours. When we reached the end of the tier, the footage shows us turning around, standing at attention, waiting. The figure in gray walked between us. He stopped, looked directly at the camera, and spoke. Count complete, 43 was present. There were only 38 inmates on D Block that night. I checked the records afterward, the ones they keep in the basement archive. May 7th, 1971. 49 years to the day before our shift. A warden made count at 3 a.m. in D Block. He counted 43 inmates. By dawn, all 43 were dead. We don't talk about what happened that night. The official report says equipment malfunction, synchronized night terrors, mass stress response. But I've seen the footage they locked away. Frame by frame analysis. In the background of every shot, behind the figure in gray, there are others. Shadows shaped like people, moving through the cells, checking on inmates who can't see them, making sure everyone is present, making sure count is correct. I still work at Attica. I still walk night count. But now, at 3 a.m., I never look too carefully at empty spaces. I never question why my log sometimes completes itself. And when I hear that distant voice counting in the dark, I don't ask who's counting. I just make sure I'm marked present. If you ever work at a Supermax facility, don't listen when the walls start breathing. I did, and I understood. My name is Dr. Elena Martins, and I have worked as a clinical psychologist at ADX Florence in Colorado for 14 years. A DX Florence is the most secure federal prison in America. 23-hour lockdown is standard. The men here are kept in solitary not as punishment, but as permanent condition. Most will die in these cells. The facility is designed to break you slowly, quietly, until there's nothing left but compliance and silence. During COVID, we went from 23 hours to complete isolation. No rec time, no human contact, meals through slots. My evaluations became purely observational, conducted through camera feeds and intercom. The first report came from Range 13 in June of 2020. Inmate named Coleman, doing life without parole for domestic terrorism. The guard noted unusual behavior during morning check. Coleman was pressed against the wall, ear flat to the concrete, listening. I pulled up the camera feed. Coleman moved his head slowly along the wall, stopping every few inches, listening intently. When I activated the intercom, he didn't acknowledge it. He just kept listening. Coleman, this is Dr. Martins. What are you doing? He finally turned toward the camera. His expression was strange, not frightened, not confused, curious. The walls are breathing, he said simply. Can't you hear it? I checked his medical records. No history of psychosis, no auditory hallucinations, exemplary conduct for 6 years. This was new. There's no breathing, Coleman. You're experiencing an auditory hallucination brought on by extended isolation. I'm going to recommend. No, he interrupted. His voice was calm, certain. Come here, stand in the corridor. Put your hand on the wall. You'll feel it. I scheduled an in-person evaluation for the following day. By the next morning, 3 more inmates on Range 13 reported the same thing. Breathing walls. All of them pressing their ears to concrete, listening. All of them insisting they could feel it. I walked Range 13 with Officer Park. The corridor was silent, except for our footsteps and the hum of fluorescent lights. We stopped outside Coleman's cell. Put your hand on the wall, Coleman said through the door slot. He was sitting cross-legged on his bunk, watching me, just for a minute. Park gave me a skeptical look. I placed my palm against the concrete. It was warm, not hot, just warm, body temperature warm. Concrete that should have been cold to the touch felt like living skin. I jerked my hand back. Coleman smiled. You felt it. Over the next week, the report spread. 6 inmates, then 9, all on Range 13, all describing the same phenomenon, walls that breathed, concrete that felt alive. I brought in maintenance. They ran thermal imaging on the entire range. The results made no sense. The concrete walls showed temperature variations consistent with breathing. warm patches that expanded and contracted in a rhythmic pattern. 12 breaths per minute, normal human respiratory rate, but walls don't breathe. The engineers tested for environmental factors, HVAC malfunction, underground heat sources, trapped moisture. Nothing explained the pattern. Then Coleman stopped sleeping. I watched on the night cameras as he sat awake, hour after hour, hand pressed to the wall. Sometimes he would lean close and whisper. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his lips moved constantly. By week 3, all 9 affected inmates had stopped sleeping. They sat against their walls, listening, whispering. Their psychiatric evaluations showed no other abnormalities. They ate. They showered during their 1 hour. They complied with all directives. They just didn't sleep. And they kept insisting the walls were breathing. I requested full medical workups, blood tests, cognitive assessments, neurological scans. Everything came back normal except one thing. Their body temperatures had synchronized. All 9 inmates showed the exact same core temperature, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, normal human temperature, but their readings were identical down to the decimal point. Hour after hour, day after day, their temperatures never varied independently. They rose and fell together, like they were all connected to the same thermostat. The facility psychiatrist suggested mass psychosis, isolation-induced delusion spreading through suggestion. But the temperature synchronization wasn't psychological. It was physiological. It was real. On day 27, Coleman's evaluation produced results I couldn't explain. His psychiatric report read normal, oriented to time, place, and person. No hallucinations, no delusions, affect appropriate, thought process organized. But at the end, I'd asked him what he heard when he listened to the walls. He said, "The facility is digesting us." I asked him to elaborate. "We're not in cells," he said calmly. "We're in chambers. Concrete doesn't breathe. Stomach lining does. We're being held inside something alive, something patient, something that knows we'll never leave." I ended the evaluation and filed the report. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. Chambers, not cells. Digestion, not incarceration. I pulled building schematics. A DX Florence was completed in 1994. The architectural designs showed a standard Supermax layout. 4 ranges, 96 cells each, concrete and steel throughout. But there was something else in the files. Construction notes from 1993. Multiple construction delays. Concrete that wouldn't set properly. Temperature control issues. Workers reporting the building felt wrong. One engineer's note buried in the archives. Recommend abandoning site. Ground composition is unsuitable. Thermal readings suggest organic interference. They built it anyway. I went to Range 13 at midnight. Officer Park let me into the corridor. It was quiet. The inmates were awake. I could see them on the monitors, all sitting against their walls. I placed both hands on the concrete. The warmth was immediate, and beneath it, I felt movement, slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction, like ribs rising and falling, like lungs filling with air. I pressed my ear to the wall. I heard it, breathing, deep, slow, patient breathing. The sound traveled through the concrete like it was coming from everywhere at once. 12 breaths per minute, the same rate as the inmates' synchronized temperatures, the same rate as a resting human respiratory system. I pulled away. Officer Park was watching me. "You heard it," he said quietly. I nodded. "I don't work Range 13 anymore." They transferred me to administrative duties after I submitted my final evaluation. I recommended immediate psychiatric transfer for all 9 inmates. They denied it. Insufficient evidence of mental instability. The inmates are still there, still listening, still synchronized. Coleman sends me letters sometimes. They get through because he's not violent, not threatening, just factual. He tells me the breathing has gotten deeper, slower, like something settling in for a long rest. He tells me 2 more inmates on Range 13 have started listening. He tells me the facility's core temperature has started to rise, 0.02 degrees per week. Barely detectable, but consistent. I still have the thermal scans. I review them sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep. The breathing pattern isn't random. It follows the layout of the ranges. 4 ranges, 4 chambers, positioned like lungs inside a rib cage. And at the center, where the administration building sits, the temperature is always exactly 98.6 degrees, normal human temperature. For something we built to house monsters, or something that's housing us. Everything in Block D was normal that night, until the screaming stopped. My name is James Chen, and I have worked as a correctional officer at San Quentin State Prison in California for 21 years. San Quentin is loud, always. Inmates yelling between cells, music playing, arguments echoing through the tiers. Even during lockdown, the noise never completely dies. It's the baseline, the proof that people are still alive in there, still fighting against the walls. When the noise stops, something is very wrong. It happened on April 19th, 2020. Full COVID lockdown, day 37. I was working second shift, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. Block D housed 78 inmates that week, ranging from minimum security transfers to condemned men waiting for appeals. At 6:42 p.m., during dinner service, Block D went silent. Not quiet. Silent. I was walking the main corridor when I noticed it. The sudden absence of sound hit me like pressure change. No voices, no footsteps, no metal clanging, just the hum of fluorescent lights and my own breathing. I stopped walking, listened, nothing. I keyed my radio. Control. This is Chen in Block D. You reading any emergency signals from this block? Static. Then, negative Chen. All systems normal. What's your status? Block just went completely silent. No inmate activity. Pause. Define silent. No sound at all. No talking. No movement. Nothing. Stand by. I waited. The silence pressed against my ears. I could hear my own pulse. I started walking again, checking cells as I went. Cell D-04. Inmate Wilson sat on his bunk, back to the door, facing the corner. Cell D-05. Inmate Ross, same position, back to door, facing corner. Cell D-06, same. Every cell on the tier showed the same thing: inmates sitting or standing, all facing the same corner of their cells, all completely still, all silent. I approached cell D-08, inmate Martinez. I'd known him for 6 years, talked to him every shift. He was loud, always had something to say, always pushing boundaries. Now, he sat facing the corner, perfectly motionless. I tapped on the door with my flashlight. Martinez, you okay? No response. I opened the observation slot. Martinez, I'm talking to you. He didn't turn around, but his mouth was moving. No sound came out, but I could see his jaw working, his lips forming words in rapid succession. I called for medical. By the time Dr. Stevens arrived, I'd checked 40 cells, all the same, every inmate facing a corner, mouths moving without sound. None of them responded to verbal commands or physical noise. Stevens examined Martinez through the slot. Martinez, can you hear me? Martinez's mouth kept moving, silent words pouring out in an endless stream. We need to open the cell, Stevens said. I unlocked D-08. Stevens stepped inside carefully. Martinez didn't acknowledge us. Stevens moved around to see his face. Martinez's eyes were open, focused on the corner, unblinking. His mouth moved constantly, but no sound emerged. Stevens checked his vitals, pulse elevated, breathing shallow and rapid, pupils responsive to light. Martinez, Stevens said directly in front of him, what are you saying? Martinez's eyes finally moved. They focused on Stevens. His mouth kept moving silently. Then, slowly, he raised one hand and pointed at the corner he'd been facing. There was nothing there, just concrete walls meeting at a 90-degree angle. Stevens turned to me. Check if they're all pointing at the same type of corner. I went cell to cell. Every inmate faced the northeast corner, the exact same orientation throughout the entire block. 78 people, all facing the same compass direction, all speaking silently. Control sent additional officers. We checked every cell. The pattern held. And then someone noticed the next detail. They were all saying the same thing. Officer Park had training in lip reading. She watched the camera feeds, studying the inmates' mouth movements. After 20 minutes, she called me to the monitor station. They're repeating the same phrase, she said, over and over. What phrase? She played back the footage, slow motion, watching Martinez's lips. We can see it. We can see it now. It's looking back. That's when the audio analysis came back. The tech team had run sophisticated sound detection in Block D. They said the cells weren't actually silent. There was sound. We just couldn't hear it. The inmates were speaking at frequencies outside normal human range, ultrasonic vocalization, 22 kilohertz and higher, the same frequencies bats use, the same frequencies that cause disorientation and nausea in humans. But humans can't produce those frequencies. We can't. Our vocal cords don't work that way. The tech played the recording through frequency conversion software, bringing it down to audible range. 78 voices, speaking in perfect unison. We can see it. We can see it now. It's looking back. We can see it. We can see it now. It's looking back. over and over, endless repetition. Dr. Stevens ordered immediate psychiatric lockdown. We started extracting inmates one by one for evaluation. They came quietly, still facing that northeast corner even as we moved them, still speaking silently, still looking at something we couldn't see. The evaluations showed the same results for all 78 inmates: medically sound, neurologically normal, no evidence of drugs or toxins, no shared dietary contamination, no environmental factors that could cause synchronized behavior. They just kept saying the same thing at frequencies humans can't produce. On day 2, we brought in audio forensics experts. They mapped the ultrasonic frequencies throughout Block D. They found something impossible. The sound wasn't originating from the inmates. It was coming from the northeast corners of the cells, all of them broadcasting at 22 kilohertz. The inmates were responding to it, repeating it. Their vocal cords had somehow adapted to match the frequency. The experts analyzed the source signal. They said it had patterns, structure. It wasn't random noise. It was organized, purposeful. It was language. On day 3, 11 inmates developed retinal burns. Ophthalmologists couldn't explain it. The burns were consistent with staring at intensely bright light, but the cells had standard fluorescent fixtures, nothing that could cause that level of damage. The burn patterns were identical across all 11 inmates, concentrated in the same area of the retina, like they'd all stared at the same thing, something bright, something that was looking back. They evacuated Block D on day 4, moved all 78 inmates to other facilities. The block has been sealed ever since. They claim structural concerns, water damage, electrical issues, but I've seen the reports they won't release. The ones from the electromagnetic field specialists. They detected radiation in those northeast corners. Nothing dangerous, nothing that could harm you, just enough to register on their equipment. The same signature you'd get from something observing, something watching through a frequency we can't perceive. I don't work Block D anymore. Nobody does. But sometimes, late at night when the facility is quiet, I can feel it. That pressure, that absence of sound that isn't really silence. And if I stand in just the right spot, in just the right corner, I can almost hear it. That ultrasonic frequency, still broadcasting, still saying something we were never supposed to understand, still looking for people who can see it looking back. I check my vision every month now, looking for burns I don't remember getting, looking for proof that I stared at something I shouldn't have seen, looking for evidence that whatever was in those corners is still watching. And every month, I'm terrified I'll find it. There's a room in this facility we're never supposed to open. I know why. My name is Rebecca Torres, and I have worked as a medical officer at Rikers Island in New York for 13 years. Rikers processes thousands of inmates every year. Most are short term, pre-trial detention, misdemeanors, people waiting for court dates or transfers. During COVID lockdown, the population dropped, but the isolation intensified. 23 hours in cell, no contact, no movement, just waiting. That's when the time started disappearing. The first incident occurred on May 3rd, 2020. Morning count showed that all inmates present in C-74, the isolation wing we'd converted for quarantine cases. But 3 inmates reported the same impossible thing during breakfast service. They were missing an hour. Inmate Davis said he went to sleep at 2:30 a.m. When he woke up, his cell clock read 3:47 a.m., but he had no memory of the time between. Just darkness, then waking up exactly 1 hour and 17 minutes later. Inmate Park reported the same thing. 2:30 to 3:47 missing time. So did inmate Chen. Same gap. 2:30 to 3:47. I logged it as sleep disturbance. Isolation does strange things to perception. Your internal clock breaks down. Time becomes fluid. I'd seen it before, but then the cameras proved them right. Security reviewed the footage between 2:47 and 3:47 a.m. The recordings showed nothing, not corrupted, not static, just nothing. 60 minutes of blank feed. When the footage resumed at 3:47, all 3 inmates were in different positions than they'd been at 2:47. Davis had been lying on his bunk. At 3:47, he was standing at his cell door. Park had been sitting at his desk. At 3:47, he was on the floor. Chen had been facing the wall. At 3:47, he was facing the camera. None of them remembered moving. The tech team checked the system. They found the time code intact. The hour existed in the logs. It just wasn't recorded. 60 minutes of missing data across 12 cameras covering C-74. I scheduled psychiatric evaluations for all 3. The next night, it happened again. This time, 7 inmates reported missing time. Same window, 2:47 to 3:47 a.m. Same complete absence of memory. The security footage showed the same 60-minute gap, but this time the cell doors were involved. The electronic logs showed activity during the missing hour, cell doors opening and closing, movement sensors triggering in the corridor, but the cameras captured none of it, just that blank space where an hour should be. When the footage resumed, 2 inmates were in different cells than they'd been assigned. Nobody had moved them. Nobody remembered moving. The doors had been locked before the gap and locked after it. But during that hollow hour, something had rearranged them. By night 3, it was 18 inmates, all in C-74, all reporting the same missing hour, all waking up in positions they didn't remember taking. I was there for night 4. I sat in the monitoring station with Officer Williams, watching the feeds. We had 12 screens showing different angles of C-74. At 2:46 a.m., everything was normal. Inmates sleeping or reading. Quiet night. At 2:47, the screens went dark. Not off. Dark. Like we were still receiving feed, but the feed was showing pure black. Williams checked the system. All cameras operational. All feeds active. Just nothing visible. Power outage? He suggested. Lights are still on, I said, pointing at the timestamp. The system clock was running. The time code advanced normally. 2:48, 2:49, 2:50. At 2:51, I felt it. A pressure change. Like the air in the monitoring station had suddenly become thicker. My ears popped. Williams grabbed his chest. You feel that? He gasped. I nodded. The pressure increased. It felt like diving deep underwater, like the walls were pressing in. The timestamp kept advancing. 2:55, 300, 310. At 3:15, one of the screens flickered. For just a second, the image returned. C-74 corridor. Empty. Except for the cell doors. They were all open. The image vanished back to black. Williams started breathing hard. We need to call this in. Wait, I said. At 3:32, another flicker. The corridor again. Cell doors still open. But now there was something in the hallway. A figure, dark, indistinct, moving from cell to cell. Gone again. 3:45. The pressure suddenly released. My ears popped again. Williams gasped like he'd been underwater. At 3:47 exactly, the feeds returned to normal. The corridor was empty. All cell doors closed. Inmates in their assigned cells. Everything looked exactly as it had at 2:46. Except one thing. In cell C-23, inmate Davis stood facing the door. His arm was raised, and carved into his forearm, fresh and bleeding, were 4 words. It counts us tonight. We opened his cell immediately. Medical rushed in. Davis didn't resist. He just stood there, staring at nothing, while they bandaged his arm. Did you do this? I asked him. He looked at me. His eyes were clear, lucid. I don't remember, he said quietly, but I heard it counting during the dark hour. It was counting all of us. The medical examiner analyzed the wounds, self-inflicted. The carving was done with the edge of Davis's metal meal tray, but the depth and precision suggested he'd been extremely focused, almost mechanical. The handwriting matched his. But Davis was left-handed. The carving was on his left forearm. He would have had to use his right hand. He had no explanation for how he'd managed the detail. Security pulled the electronic logs. During the missing hour, the system had recorded activity. Cell doors cycling open and closed in sequence, starting at 2:47, ending at 3:47. Each door opened for exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds. 78 cells in C. 78 times 4.5 minutes equals 585 minutes. 9 hours and 45 minutes of door activity compressed into 60 minutes of missing time. The math didn't work, unless time inside the missing hour moved differently, unless that hollow space contained more minutes than it should. I reviewed all the reports. Every inmate who experienced the missing time described the same sensation: darkness, pressure, a sense of being counted, of something moving through the cells, checking them, marking them, and they all remembered one other detail. During the hollow hour, they could hear something go outside their cells. Footsteps, slow, methodical, moving from door to door, counting. They evacuated C-74 on day 6. Claimed electrical problems, fire hazard. They spread the 78 inmates across other facilities, but the missing hour followed them. Inmates transferred to other locations started reporting it. Different facilities, different cities, all experiencing the same 60-minute gap. 2:47 to 3:47 a.m., all waking with no memory, all hearing the counting. I don't work nights anymore. They moved me to day shift after I submitted my report, after I told them what I'd felt in that monitoring station, that pressure, that sense of something massive and patient moving through our facility. Something that needed to count us, something that needed to know exactly how many we were, exactly where we were, exactly how to find us. Davis sends me letters. He's at a facility in Pennsylvania now. He says the hollow hour still happens. Every night, 2:47 to 3:47. He wakes up at 3:47 with no memory of the time between, but each morning there's new writing in his wall, carved shallow enough that it fades by afternoon count. Numbers, always numbers, counting down. He's at 42 now. He doesn't know what happens when it reaches zero. Neither do I. But every night at 2:46 a.m., wherever I am, I feel that pressure start to build, and I know it's counting me too. I didn't believe in the dead returning until they started remembering things they shouldn't know. My name is Daniel Cross, and I have worked as a federal contractor specializing in facility restoration for 19 years. When COVID hit in 2020, the government started using decommissioned facilities for emergency overflow detention. That's how I ended up at Alcatraz, preparing D Block for temporary isolation housing. Alcatraz closed as a federal penitentiary in 1963. It's been a tourist site ever since, but the cells are still there. The isolation units are still functional, and during a pandemic, functional cells become valuable real estate. My job was to assess structural integrity and environmental safety, make sure the plumbing worked, the electrical was sound, the ventilation adequate. I had 3 weeks to certify D Block ready for occupancy. Room D-9 was the problem. It's a solitary confinement cell, 5 feet by 9 feet, solid steel door, no windows, just concrete and darkness, and the sound of San Francisco Bay wind howling through the ventilation shafts. The temperature in D-9 stayed at 31 degrees Fahrenheit. I checked it 5 times with 3 different thermometers. 31 degrees. Every measurement. Even though the heating system pumped warm air directly into that cell. Even though the concrete walls were room temperature when I touched them. The air inside D-9 was freezing. I reported it as environmental anomaly. The HVAC specialists came out. They couldn't explain it. The heating worked, the ventilation worked, the insulation was intact, but D-9 stayed cold. They told me to seal it off, use the other cells. There were 27 other isolation units in D Block. They could work around one malfunctioning room. But then the detainees arrived, 3 men, emergency quarantine cases from a county facility dealing with an outbreak. They needed complete isolation for 14 days. Medical observation. They were low risk, non-violent offenders. Just people who tested positive and needed somewhere to wait it out. We put them in D-6, D-7, and D-8. Left D-9 sealed. On night 2, I was doing my evening walkthrough when I heard it. Voices from inside D-9. Not one voice, 3. Speaking in conversation, laughing occasionally. The sound was muffled by the steel door, but distinct. People talking like they were in the middle of a casual discussion. I checked the seal. Locked. No one inside. I pressed my ear to the door. The voices continued. I couldn't make out words, but the cadence was clear. Question, answer, laughter, question, answer, agreement, normal human conversation. Except the room was empty. I opened the door. The voices stopped immediately. The cell was dark, cold, vacant, 31 degrees according to my thermometer. I closed the door and walked away. The next morning, the detainee in D-8, a man named Morrison, asked me about the other prisoners. What other prisoners? I said. The three in the cell next to mine, Morrison said. I hear them talking at night. Sound like old timers. Been here a while. There's no one in D-9, I told him. That cell is sealed. Morrison looked confused. I hear three distinct voices every night around 8 p.m. They talk for about 2 hours, then it goes quiet. I checked with the other two detainees. Both reported the same thing. Voices from D-9, conversations, sometimes arguments, always at night. I set up a recorder outside D-9 that evening, high quality audio equipment. If there were voices, I'd capture them. At 8:03 p.m., the recording picked up sound. Three voices, male, speaking clearly. When I played it back, I could finally make out words. They were discussing prison routine, guard rotations, meal times, recreation schedules. They used slang I didn't recognize, old-fashioned phrases, screw for guard, fish for new inmate, the rock for Alcatraz, language from the 1940s and 50s. I checked historical records. D-9 had housed three inmates during a 1942 disciplinary incident. They'd been locked in together for 72 hours as punishment for a fight. All three had served sentences during that era. All three had died in Alcatraz. Different years, different causes. But all three had spent significant time in D-block isolation. The recording continued. I listened to 2 hours of conversation. They discussed guards by name, guards who'd worked at Alcatraz decades before it closed. They complained about the cold. They talked about the fog rolling in off the bay. They talked about waiting for their release dates that had passed in 1963 when the prison shut down. On night 5, Morrison reported something new. They can hear me, he said. The men in D-9. When I talk, they respond. They ask me what year it is. What did you tell them? 2020. They got quiet after that. Haven't spoken since. That night, I listened at the door. Silence. The voices had stopped, but the temperature had dropped. D-9 now read 27 degrees Fahrenheit. Getting colder. On night 6, the detainee in D-6 started behaving strangely. His name was Chen. During my morning check, he was standing at his cell door, speaking, but he wasn't speaking English. I activated the intercom. Chen, you okay? He turned toward the camera. When he spoke, his voice had changed, deeper, older, and the words were pure 1940s slang. You got a light, boss. Been trying to get a smoke for 3 days. I checked Chen's intake records. 24 years old, born in 1996, Grew up in San Jose, no connection to Alcatraz, no reason he'd know vintage prison slang. Chen, what's happening? He smiled. Name's not Chen. That's the fish in here with me. I'm Garrett. Been on the rock since 39. You knew? I called medical immediately. By the time Dr. Reeves arrived, all three detainees were affected. Morrison spoke in a voice that wasn't his, claiming to be an inmate named Duffy. The third detainee, Williams, answered to Marchetti. Garrett, Duffy, and Marchetti. I checked the records. All three names appeared in Alcatraz documentation. All three had served time in D Block. All three had been cellmates at various points during the 1940s. All three had died before the prison closed. Dr. Reeves ran neurological tests. The detainees were physically fine, brain function normal, no signs of psychosis or dissociative disorder. They just believed they were different people, people who'd been dead for decades. And they knew things. Morrison, speaking as Duffy, described the layout of the prison as it had been in 1947. He detailed guard assignments, inmate populations, daily routines, information that wasn't available online, information you'd only know if you'd lived there. Chen, as Garrett, recalled conversations with guards who'd died in the 1970s, word for word exchanges, names of guards' family members, personal details that weren't in any public record. Williams, as Marchetti, drew a map of D Block from memory. Perfect accuracy, including features that had been removed during the 1960s renovation. The temperature in D-9 dropped to 23 degrees. We evacuated all three detainees on day 8. They were transferred to psychiatric facilities for evaluation. Within 72 hours of leaving Alcatraz, they returned to normal. No memory of speaking as other people, no memory of the things they'd known. I checked the cell one last time before we sealed it permanently. The walls were covered in fingerprints, hundreds of them, on the inside of the steel door, facing out, like someone had been pressing their hands against it, trying to get out. But the door had been locked from the outside. No one had been inside D-9 during the entire incident. I ran the fingerprints through the database, 3 matches. Garrett, Duffy, and Marchetti. Prints on file from their original intake in 1939, 1941, and 1943. Prints that appeared on the inside of a door that hadn't been opened in 57 years. I don't do restoration work on closed facilities anymore. I stick to new construction, modern buildings with no history. But sometimes I still feel it. That cold, that 31-degree chill that doesn't come from HVAC malfunction. It comes from something older, something that remembers being locked in small rooms, something that's still waiting for a release date that will never come. D-9 is welded shut now, but the temperature in that cell continues to drop. Last reading I saw was 19 degrees, getting colder, like something inside is still waiting, still remembering, still trying to get out. If you ever hear chains dragging through walls, don't try to find the source. I did, and I wish I hadn't. My name is Thomas Brennan, and I have worked as a night supervisor at Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield for 8 years. The reformatory closed as an active prison in 1990, but the building is still used occasionally for temporary detention overflow. During COVID, when county jails were overcrowded, we opened 2 wings for short-term holding. The building is old, built in 1886, Gothic architecture, stone walls 4 feet thick. It looks like something from a horror movie, which is why film crews rent it sometimes. But most people don't know that. Before it was retrofitted in the 1970s, the reformatory used to chain prisoners to the walls during punishment. They stopped that practice in 1947, removed all the chains, updated the facility to modern standards, but the sound never left. The first report came on June 2nd, 2020. We had 17 detainees housed in East Wing, all quarantine cases waiting for court dates. Around 11 p.m., 3 inmates reported hearing chains dragging through the walls of their cells. Officer Martinez checked every cell. No chains. The walls were solid stone and concrete. Nothing mechanical ran through them. No pipes, no conduits, nothing that could create that sound. I logged it as auditory hallucination, stress response to isolation. The next night, 7 inmates reported the sound. Same description. Heavy chains dragging slowly through stone, moving from cell to cell. The sound would start at one end of the wing and travel methodically down the corridor, passing through walls like they weren't there. On night 3, I heard it myself. I was doing walkthrough at midnight when the sound started, deep in the walls. Metal scraping against stone, slow, deliberate movement. The sound moved past me, traveling through the wall to my left, heading toward the cells at the end of the corridor. I pressed my hand against the stone. I could feel vibration, something heavy moving inside the wall. I called engineering. They came out the next day with sonic detection equipment. They mapped the walls, looking for hollow spaces, mechanical systems, anything that could explain the sound. They found nothing. The walls were solid, 4 feet of stone and mortar. No gaps, no access points, nothing inside them but rock. But that night, the equipment picked up the sound anyway. Acoustic sensors placed throughout East Wing recorded it clearly. Chains dragging, moving through the walls. The sound trivialized at approximately 3 feet per minute. The pattern was consistent. Started at the north end, moved south, stopped at each cell for exactly 45 seconds, then continued. The engineers couldn't explain it. The sound had no source. It just existed inside the walls. On night 6, the inmates started carving. Officer Chen found the first one during morning check. Inmate Davis had used the edge of his metal bunk frame to carve into his wrist. Not deep enough to cause serious damage, just shallow cuts. Precise, deliberate, but what he carved made no sense. Numbers, 5 digits, 18,634. By evening count, 3 more inmates had done the same thing. Different numbers, but same location on their wrists, same shallow precision. Medical evaluated them. None remembered carving the numbers. They'd woken up with fresh cuts and no explanation. I checked historical records. Those numbers matched inmate identification codes from the reformatory's early years. 1800s through 1940s, before they switched to modern alphanumeric systems. 18,634 was a prisoner named Michael Brennan, no relation to me. He'd been held in East Wing in 1923, charged with theft. During punishment, he'd been chained to his cell wall for 6 days. He died on the fifth wall from infection. The other numbers matched similar cases. Men who'd been chained during punishment, men who'd died while chained. 7 inmates total, all died in East Wing between 1912 and 1947. All died while bound to walls. On night 8, the chain sound changed. It still traveled through the walls, but now it was accompanied by another sound. Breathing, heavy, labored breathing, like someone dragging themselves forward despite exhaustion. The acoustic sensors picked it up. Respiratory pattern consistent with extreme physical duress. Someone moving while chained. Someone who'd been moving for a very long time. That night, 7 detainees carved their wrists. All 7 carved the same thing. It's measuring us. Officer Martinez found them during 2 a.m. check. All 7 sitting on their bunks, staring at their wrists. Fresh blood, fresh words carved in neat, small letters across their forearms. It's measuring us for the chains. Medical sedated them. Psychiatrists evaluated them. Mass psychosis, suggestion, isolation stress. They gave the standard explanations. But I read the medical reports carefully. The carving on all 7 inmates was identical. Same depth, same spacing, same precise lettering, like they'd all used the same template, like the same hand had guided each cut. On night 10, I stayed in East Wing to observe. I positioned myself in the corridor at 11 p.m. The lights were low. The building was quiet except for the occasional cough or shift of weight from the cells. At 11:17, the chain sound started. I watched the wall as it passed. The stone didn't move. The surface remained solid, but I could feel the vibration, could hear the metal scraping, could hear that labored breathing. Then I saw the shadows. 7 of them, dark shapes moving inside the stone, visible for just seconds as they passed each light fixture, shapes that looked almost human. Almost. They were dragged. That's the only word for it. Something pulled them through the wall, and they resisted. Their shadow forms twisted and struggled, but they kept moving, kept being dragged forward, 45 seconds at each cell, then continuing. I followed them, walked alongside the wall as the shadows moved through it. The chain sound was louder now. I could distinguish individual links, could hear how the weight shifted with each pull. The shadows stopped at cell E-12. The inmate inside, a man named Wilson, sat up on his bunk. I watched through his cell window. He wasn't awake. His eyes were closed, but his hands moved to his wrists. He began pressing his fingers against his skin, not cutting, measuring, like he was checking the circumference, like he was seeing if something would fit. The shadows in the wall reached toward him. I unlocked his cell and pulled him out. The moment I moved him into the corridor, he woke up, confused, disoriented. He looked at his wrists. There were indentations, pressure marks, perfect circles around both wrists, like shackles, like someone had been measuring him for chains. We evacuated East Wing that night, moved all 17 detainees to the county facility. The wing has been sealed since then. They claim structural concerns, historical preservation requirements. But I've seen the surveillance footage they won't release. Thermal imaging from Night 11. After the evacuation, the building empty, 7 thermal signatures moving through the east wing walls, human-shaped, human temperature, moving cell to cell, stopping at its end door, waiting, measuring empty spaces for prisoners who aren't there anymore. I don't work nights at the reformatory now, but I still hear it sometimes. That chain sound in my apartment, in my car, in quiet moments when I'm alone. I check my wrists every morning, looking for indentations, looking for pressure marks, looking for proof that something measured me while I slept. Last week I found them. Perfect circles, both wrists, exactly the right size for shackles. I measured them carefully. The diameter matches historical records for chains used at Ohio State Reformatory between 1912 and 1947. Chains that were removed 73 years ago. Chains that are still looking for prisoners, still measuring, still dragging through walls, one cell at a time. I don't know what happens when the measurement is complete, when the chains find wrists that fit exactly. But I hear them getting closer every night, and the marks on my wrists are getting deeper. Everything in the isolation tier was routine that night, until the echo started giving different answers. My name is Patricia Valdez, and I have worked as an acoustic engineer for correctional facilities in Illinois for 16 years. My job is to ensure proper sound insulation between cells, reduce noise pollution, and maintain audio monitoring systems. When Cook County Jail called me in March of 2020 about an echo problem in their COVID isolation tier, I expected a simple fix: structural defect, sound reflection, basic physics. I was wrong. Tier 3 was converted for isolation cases in early March. 42 cells, concrete walls, standard construction. The tier was designed with sound dampening materials specifically to prevent echo. Every surface was treated, every angle calculated to absorb and disperse sound waves. There should have been no echo at all, but the inmates reported hearing their voices come back wrong. The first complaint came from cell T 3-07. Inmate Rodriguez said when he spoke, he heard his words repeated back to him. Not immediately, about 3 seconds later, which would be unusual but not impossible in poor acoustic design. The problem was what the echo said. Rodriguez would say, "Hello." The echo would respond, "Not yet." He'd say, "Testing." The echo would respond, "Listening." He'd say his own name. The echo would respond with a different name, always a different name. I set up recording equipment in his cell, asked him to speak normally while I monitored from the control room. Rodriguez, can you hear me? Echo, 3 seconds later, we've always heard you. Rodriguez, who are you? Echo, the ones below. I checked the recordings. The echo voice matched Rodriguez's vocal signature. Same pitch, same timbre, same speech patterns. It was his voice speaking, but the words were different. By day 3, 12 inmates in Tier 3 reported the same phenomenon. They'd speak. Their own voices would answer back with different words. Always a 3-second delay. Always unexpected responses. I mapped the acoustic properties of the entire tier, looking for the source, looking for where the sound could be bouncing from to create such a specific delay. I found it. The echo was coming from below. Directly below Tier 3, according to the blueprints, there should have been a maintenance sublevel, storage, electrical systems, basic infrastructure. I requested access. The facility manager looked confused. There's no sublevel under Tier 3, he said. I showed him the blueprints. He checked his own records. According to current facility maps, there was nothing below Tier 3, just foundation. The blueprints I had were from the original construction in 1992. They clearly showed a sublevel. We checked the building plans, permits, inspection records. The sublevel had been sealed during construction, deemed structurally unsound, filled with concrete. It shouldn't exist as an accessible space, but the echo was coming from there. I set up directional microphones throughout Tier 3, acoustic sensors that could trace the exact origin point of reflected sound. Every time an inmate spoke and the echo responded, I tracked the source. 42 feet directly below the tier, in the sealed sublevel that shouldn't be accessible. On day 5, the echo started giving instructions. Inmate Park spoke to his lawyer via video call. During the conversation, he heard his own voice whispering underneath the call audio, telling him things, specific things. Tell them you're sick. Refuse the medication. Mark the wall at midnight. Park ignored it, but the whispered instructions continued. Always his own voice. Always 3 seconds delayed from whatever he was actually saying. Other inmates reported the same thing, their voices giving them orders, specific, detailed orders, where to stand, when to sleep, what to write. 3 inmates obeyed. They marked their walls at midnight, used whatever they had available, soap, food residue, blood. They drew symbols, geometric patterns, spirals and angles that hurt to look at. I photographed the symbols, ran them through architectural databases. They matched foundation markers, ancient construction symbols used in building rituals, marks meant to seal or bind something in place. The marks from the inmates were inverted, reversed, like they were designed to unseal. On day 7, the acoustic sensors detected something new. Background noise from the sealed sublevel, not echo, not reflection, original sound. Something down there was making noise, movement, scraping, rhythmic impacts like footsteps on concrete. I calculated the acoustic signature, multiple sources, at least 12 distinct sound origins, all moving in the sealed space that shouldn't exist. The facility called in structural engineers. They used ground-penetrating radar to scan below Tier 3. The sublevel wasn't filled with concrete. It was empty. 42 feet down, an entire floor of the building that had been marked as sealed but was somehow hollow. The radar showed walls, corridors, rooms, and movement. Thermal signatures, 12 of them, human-sized, moving through the empty sublevel. They prepared to breach, drill through the foundation, access the sealed level, see what was actually down there. The night before the breach, every inmate in Tier 3 heard the echo at once. I was monitoring when it happened. 11:47 p.m. All 42 cells. Simultaneous audio event. The inmates weren't speaking, they were sleeping, but their voices echoed anyway. 42 voices, all speaking in unison, all saying the same thing. Don't open it, we're holding it closed. The acoustic analysis showed the voices coming from below, from the sealed sublevel, but the voices matched the inmates sleeping in their cells above. Perfect vocal matches, like there were copies of them down there, speaking in their voices, warning us. I reviewed historical records. The building was constructed on the site of an older jail, demolished in 1989. That jail had a punishment wing, solitary confinement, 42 cells, all underground, all sealed after a riot in 1988. 12 inmates died. The wing was deemed too dangerous to renovate. They built over it, poured new foundation, started fresh, but they didn't fill it in. They just sealed the doors and built on top, left everything down there intact. Cells, corridors, bodies, the thermal signatures in the sealed level matched the number of dead from the riot. 12. The voices warning us matched the number of inmates currently in Tier 3. 42. The engineers canceled the breach, but the echo continued. Now it doesn't just answer differently, it counts. Every night at 11:47 p.m., the echo counts in all 42 cells, always in the inmates' own voices, always counting down. Started at 300, now it's at 76. The inmates are terrified. They hear themselves counting, hear their own voices getting closer to zero, but they're not speaking. They're listening to something below them using their voices, using their vocal signatures to mark time. I don't work at Cook County anymore. I transferred after I analyzed the final acoustic data. The 12 signatures moving below Tier 3 aren't random. They're moving in formation, synchronized. They're directly underneath the 42 cells above. One thermal signature positioned beneath every 3 or 4 cells, waiting, listening, counting down with voices that aren't theirs. The last recording I analyzed showed something impossible. When the echo counts, there's overlap, millisecond variations between when the sound originates below and when it manifests in the cells above, which means the echo isn't reflecting up, it's bleeding through. Sound traveling from one space to another, through solid concrete that shouldn't allow passage, through barriers that are failing, through seals that are breaking. The count is at 61 now. I check the facility reports every week. Nobody knows what happens at 0, but the inmates know. They hear it in their own voices, hear the answer they're too afraid to ask. When we reach 0, you come down and we come up. I've started hearing echoes in my own apartment. When I speak, 3-second delay, my voice answering back with words I didn't say. Last night it counted 61 in my voice from below my floor. I live on the 14th floor. There's nothing below me but 12 floors of apartments, 12 floors, 12 thermal signatures. I don't speak out loud anymore. I'm afraid of what my voice might tell me next. I never reported what the cameras captured that night, but I kept the footage. I wish I hadn't. My name is Kevin Park, and I have worked as a security systems analyst at Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York for 11 years. My job is to maintain the surveillance infrastructure. 340 cameras covering every corridor, cell block, and common area. I watch monitors. I archive footage. I ensure nothing happens without being recorded. During the COVID lockdown in April of 2020, I noticed something wrong with West Wing feeds. The cameras would capture movement that shouldn't exist. Shadows in empty corridors, cell doors opening when no one was near them, and the inmates themselves all staring at the same spot, at nothing. The first incident occurred on April 12th. I was monitoring the night shift feeds when I noticed unusual uniformity in West Wing. All 38 inmates visible on camera were positioned identically in their cells, sitting upright on their bunks, facing the same direction, not facing their doors, not facing the corridor, facing the northeast corner of their cells. I zoomed in on different cameras. The angle was precise. Every inmate staring at the exact same point in space, like they were all looking at something positioned in the corner, but the corners were empty. Just concrete walls meeting at 90-degree angles. I checked the timestamp, 3:22 a.m. For 18 minutes, none of them moved. They just stared. At 3:40 a.m. exactly, they all lay down simultaneously and went to sleep. I reviewed the footage the next morning. The synchronization was perfect. 38 people moving as one, no communication between cells, no visible coordination, just simultaneous behavior. I flagged it for the psych staff. On April 14th, it happened again. Same time, 3:22 a.m. All inmates in West Wing stopped whatever they were doing and stared at their northeast corners for 18 minutes. This time, I noticed something else. Their eyes moved, following something, like they were watching an object move slowly across the wall, but there was nothing there. The corners remained empty on camera. I enhanced the footage, increased brightness, adjusted contrast, looking for any visual anomaly that might explain what they were seeing. And I found it. For 3 frames, spread across the 18-minute period, there was something in the corner of cell W-15, a distortion, a blur that didn't match the rest of the image, like the camera couldn't quite focus on something that was there. I isolated those frames, ran them through image analysis software. The blur had a shape, roughly human, tall, standing in the corner, but the edges were wrong. They flickered between frames, like whatever was there existed partially outside normal visual spectrum. I checked the other cameras. The same blur appeared in the corners of cells W-7 and W-23, always in the northeast corner, always during that 18-minute window, always watching the inmates who were watching it. On April 16th, Officer Chen called me during her night rounds. Her voice was shaking. "Park, you need to see this." I met her in West Wing corridor. She pointed at cell W-12. The inmate inside, a man named Davidson, was standing pressed against his cell door, His face was inches from the observation window. He wasn't blinking. He's been like that for 40 minutes, Chen whispered. Won't respond, won't move. I checked the camera feed. Davidson had stood up at 3:22 a.m., walked to his door, and stopped. The timestamp now showed 4:03 a.m. Davidson, I called through the intercom. Step back from the door. No response. He just stared through the window, but his eyes weren't focused on us. They were focused past us, on something behind us in the corridor. I turned around. The corridor was empty. I looked back at Davidson. His eyes tracked slowly to the left, following something that was moving, something we couldn't see. Then he spoke. He wants to know why we're in his cells. Chen grabbed my arm. Who? Who wants to know? Davidson's eyes kept tracking left. The man in the stripes. He says these are his cells. He says we're in the wrong place. I pulled up the archival records. Sing Sing has been operating since 1826. I searched for any incidents in West Wing, any prisoners who might match Man in Stripes. I found 73 possibilities, but one stood out. Thomas Whitmore, executed 1898. Last cell, W-12, the same cell Davidson currently occupied. Whitmore had been in solitary for 16 months before his execution, punishment for attacking a guard. Records indicated he'd developed severe psychological issues during isolation, claimed the guards were phantoms, claimed the prison wasn't real, claimed he was the only real person in the facility and everyone else was in the wrong place. He died believing he was the prisoner and everyone else was the ghost. On April 18th, the security footage captured something it shouldn't have been able to record. At 3:22 a.m., all West Wing inmates assumed their positions, sitting upright, staring at corners. But this time, the cameras caught it clearly. In the northeast corner of cell W-12, a figure appeared, visible for the full 18 minutes. A man in striped prison uniform, old style, 1800s design. He stood perfectly still, his head tilted at an angle that should have broken his neck. He was staring Wyatt Davidson. I watched in real time. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. And Davidson stared back. When I checked the other cameras, the same figure appeared in multiple cells. Same striped uniform, same broken neck angle, same corners. He was in 12 cells simultaneously. I called the warden, brought him to the monitoring station, showed him the feeds. That's not possible, he said. It's happening, I replied. We watched as the figure slowly raised one hand, pointed at Davidson, then at the camera, then at us watching through the monitor. The warden ordered immediate lockdown of West Wing, but before the guards could respond, every inmate in West Wing stood up, walked to their cell doors, and spoke in perfect unison. Why are you in his cells? The audio was synchronized across all 38 cells. 38 voices speaking as one, all asking the same question. These are his cells. He never left. Why are you here? The guards evacuated West Wing, moved all 38 inmates to other blocks. The facility psychologist evaluated them. Every single inmate described the same experience. They'd seen the man in stripes, tall, thin, head tilted wrong, standing in their corners every night at 3:22 a.m. watching them, asking silently why they were in his space, asking why they were haunting his prison. I reviewed the footage obsessively, frame by frame analysis of every appearance. The figure showed up clearly, but when I checked the source files, something was wrong. The metadata showed the figure wasn't captured by the camera. He was inserted, like he'd been edited into the feed, but the editing happened in real time during live recording, which is technically impossible unless he wasn't in the cells, unless he was in the cameras, unless he was in the system itself. I traced his appearances. They started small, single frame glitches, then multiple frames, then full visibility. The progression suggested he was learning how to manifest, learning how to make himself visible through our technology, learning how to be recorded. West Wing remains empty. The facility claims electrical issues, but I still monitor those cameras. Even empty, they show activity. At 3:22 a.m. every night, the figure appears in those corners. 12 cells, standing, watching, his head tilted at that impossible angle. And now he's spreading. Last week, he appeared in East Wing, 2 cells, same time, same position. Last night, North Wing, 4 cells. He's learning the layout, claiming more territory. Corner by corner, cell by cell, I've analyzed his movement pattern. At the current rate, he'll reach every cell in the facility by June. By July, he'll be in the administrative offices. By August, the monitoring station. I've started seeing him in my peripheral vision at 3:22 a.m. when I'm reviewing feeds, standing in the corner of my office, not on the camera, in the actual room. I don't look directly at him. I'm afraid of what I'll see. I'm afraid he'll ask me his question. Why am I in his prison? Why am I haunting his space? The footage keeps recording. Every night, same time, same figure, getting clearer, getting closer. Last night, he appeared in all 42 cells of West Wing simultaneously, and this time, he wasn't standing in the corners. He was standing in the center of each cell, facing the cameras, facing me. His mouth was moving, no sound, just lips forming words. I enhanced the footage, read his lips frame by frame. You're next. I don't work night shift anymore, but it doesn't matter. I checked the cameras in my apartment building, just to be safe. At 3:22 a.m. this morning, he was there, standing in my bedroom corner, head tilted wrong, watching me sleep. I wasn't dreaming. The timestamp proves it. He's not asking anymore, he's claiming. I didn't believe in impossible knowledge until inmates started reciting numbers they couldn't know. My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and I have worked as a forensic psychiatrist at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Kansas for 14 years. Leavenworth is maximum security. We house the federal system's most dangerous offenders, career criminals, organized crime figures, men who've spent decades navigating the system. During COVID lockdown in May of 2020, we implemented complete isolation in the special housing unit, 24-hour confinement, no human contact, just cells and silence and the slow grind of solitary. That's when the counting started. The first report came from cell SHU 18, inmate Cardenas, 52 years old. Life without parole for racketeering, sharp mind, perfect memory, no history of psychosis. The night guard heard him counting backwards during 2 a.m. check. Not unusual. Inmates count to pass time, count ceiling tiles, count heartbeats, count anything that gives structure to empty hours. But Cardenas was counting from 28,492. The guard logged it. I reviewed the report the next morning, asked to speak with Cardenas through the intercom. Why were you counting last night? Cardenas looked at the camera. His expression was calm, focused. I wasn't counting. I was reading. Reading what? The numbers. They're written on my wall. Can't you see them? I checked the cell feed. The walls were bare concrete. No writing. No markings. There's nothing on your wall, Cardenas. He smiled, not a happy smile, a knowing smile. Then how do I know the number? 28,492. It's right there, top left corner, written in ink that doesn't exist anymore. I scheduled an evaluation for later that day. By evening, 3 more inmates in SHU were counting backwards, all from different numbers, all claiming they could see numbers written on their walls, numbers that weren't visible on any camera feed. Cardenas, 28,492. Davis, 31,847. Morrison, 19,263. Chen, 24,109. I interviewed in each one. They all described the same phenomenon, numbers appearing on their walls, 5 digits, clear and precise, written in handwriting they didn't recognize. Old-fashioned, Morrison said, like someone wrote it with a fountain pen, perfect script. It's beautiful, actually. I checked medical records. No visual hallucinations, no drugs, no shared psychosis triggers. The next morning, Officer Williams reported something disturbing. Dr. Mitchell, you need to check the historical archives. Those numbers the inmates are seeing. I think I know what they are. Leavenworth has been operational since 1895. Over a century of records, inmate files, execution logs, transfer documents, all archived in the basement. Williams had pulled files from the 1920s and 30s. Inmate identification numbers: 28,492, James Whitaker. Executed 1928. Cell SHU 18. 31,847, Robert Kellerman. Executed 1933. Cell SHU 22. 19,263, Thomas Price. Executed 1919. Cell SHU 09. 24,109, Michael Brennan. Executed 1924. Cell SHU 14. Each current inmate was housed in the exact same cell where an executed prisoner had died, and each inmate was counting backwards from that dead prisoner's identification number. Numbers they couldn't possibly know. Numbers that existed only in archived records from before they were born. I brought this to the warden. He authorized full psychiatric evaluation of all SHU inmates. By day 4, all 12 occupied cells in SHU reported the same phenomenon. Inmates seeing numbers, counting backwards. All numbers matched executed prisoners from the facility's early decades. And then the counting changed. Instead of just reciting numbers, the inmates started speaking, not in their own voices, in other voices, older speech patterns, regional accents they'd never had before. Cardenas spoke with a Boston accent. His file showed he'd grown up in New Mexico, never been to Massachusetts. But James Whitaker, inmate 28492, was from Boston. Davis developed a stutter. His medical records showed no speech impediment. But Robert Kellerman, inmate 31847, had documented stuttering problems. Morrison started using 1920s slang, words like gams and copacetic and the big house, language from Thomas Price's era. The psychiatrists tried every explanation: dissociative identity disorder, factitious disorder, mass psychogenic illness. None of them fit the data. The inmates weren't acting, they were channeling, speaking with knowledge and mannerisms they'd never been exposed to. On day 7, the inmates stopped speaking entirely. All 12 went silent. They sat in their cells, lips moving without sound, counting backwards with their mouths. I watched the camera feeds. Their lips formed numbers clearly, but no sound emerged. Medical examined them, vocal cords intact, no physical impediment. They could speak if they chose to. They just didn't. They counted silently, backwards, hour after hour. 28,491, 28,490, 28,489. At midnight on day 9, Cardenas reached 0. I was monitoring when it happened. His lips formed the final number, 0. Then he stopped, sat perfectly still, staring at the wall where the invisible number had been. Then his vocal cords changed. Medical had been monitoring his vitals remotely. The biometric sensors showed impossible data. His larynx structure shifted, the cartilage reconfigured, not dramatically, just enough to alter his vocal resonance. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, deeper, older, with that Boston accent fully formed. "Thank you for finishing my count," he said to the camera. "I've been counting since 1928. You freed me from the number." I activated the intercom. "Cardenas, what's happening to you?" "Cardenas is still here," the voice said. "But so am I now. We're sharing. He counted down my number. Now I can speak through him, tell my story, finish what I started." Over the next week, all 12 inmates reached 0. All 12 underwent the same transformation. Vocal changes, personality shifts. They became dual entities, themselves and the executed prisoners whose numbers they'd counted down. The psychiatric evaluations became impossible. How do you diagnose someone who has accurate memories of events from 1928? Someone who can describe guard rotations and prison layouts from before the facility was renovated? The inmates knew things. Specific things, guard names from 70 years ago, locations of tunnels that had been sealed in the 50s, burial sites for contraband that was found exactly where they said it would be. They weren't hallucinating history, they were remembering it. On day 20, the medical team discovered the physical changes were permanent. The inmates' vocal cords had restructured. The alterations were biological, real tissue modification, impossible without surgery, but none had occurred. Their bodies were adapting to house two consciousness, two sets of memories, two identities, sharing one physical form. I don't work at Leavenworth anymore. I transferred after submitting my final report, the report they classified, the report explaining that 12 executed prisoners found a way back, not as ghosts, not as hauntings, as sharers, using the living as vessels, using the act of counting backwards as the key. Each number counted down weakened the barrier. Each digit spoken was an invitation. When the count reached 0, the door opened. The executed prisoner stepped through, found a voice, found a body willing to share space, found it a way to be counted among the living again. The 12 inmates are still in Leavenworth, still in SHU, still sharing their cells and their bodies with men who died before World War II. I get letters sometimes, written in two different handwriting styles, one modern, one vintage, both signatures on each letter. The last one I received contained a warning. Don't count backwards. Don't finish any count you didn't start yourself. Numbers have power. Every number is someone's number. Every count is someone's claim. I burned the letter, but now I can't stop thinking about it. Every night I catch myself counting sheep, counting our breaths, counting seconds until sleep. And sometimes I count backwards. I started at 1,000. Last night I reached 743. I don't know whose number I'm counting down, but I can feel them listening, waiting for me to reach 0, waiting to share my voice. Everything in the segregation unit was normal that night until the lights stopped working for half the people there. My name is Michael Torres, and I have worked as a correctional officer at Tucker Unit in Arkansas for 16 years. Tucker Unit houses maximum security inmates. The segregation unit is where we put the worst of them. Disciplinary cases, violent offenders, men who can't function in general population. During extended COVID lockdown in June of 2020, we kept 11 inmates in a CG for their full isolation period. 23-hour lockdown, 1 hour rec time in individual cages. No human contact except through slots and intercoms. On June 9th, at 7:32 p.m., inmate Rodriguez filed a grievance. The lights in my cell don't work, he wrote. It's been dark for 3 days. I need this fixed. I checked the maintenance logs. No power outages, no electrical issues. Rodriguez's cell, S-04, showed normal power consumption. The lights were functioning. I walked to his cell. The fluorescent fixtures were on, bright institutional lighting. I could see everything clearly through the observation window. Rodriguez sat on his bunk in what looked like complete darkness. He was facing away from the door, hunched over, arms wrapped around his knees. I activated the intercom. Rodriguez, the lights are working fine. He didn't turn around. I can't see anything. It's been dark since Monday. Please fix the lights. The lights are on right now. I'm looking at them. You're lying. It's black in here. I can't see my hands. I called medical. They examined Rodriguez through the door, pupils reactive to light, no obvious visual impairment. But when they asked him to describe his cell, he described only darkness. Total black, he said. No shapes, no shadows, just dark. Medical scheduled him for ophthalmology the next day. That night, inmate Davis filed the same grievance. S-07, lights don't work, can't see. I checked his cell, lights on, functioning normally. Davis sat on his bunk, hands outstretched, feeling the wall like a blind man navigating unfamiliar space. By morning, 5 inmates reported the same problem, all in segregation, all claiming complete darkness, all in cells with fully functional lighting that I could see clearly. The medical team ran every test: vision, neurology, psychology. The results made no sense. The inmates had perfect vision. Ophthalmological exams showed healthy retinas, no damage, no degeneration. Their eyes worked perfectly, but they couldn't see the light. Not couldn't see well, couldn't see light at all. They described absolute darkness. But when doctors shined examination lights directly into their eyes, the pupils constricted normally. Their eyes responded to light, even though their brains registered nothing but black. By day 3, it was 8 inmates. By day 5, all 11 inmates in segregation reported darkness. I stood in the corridor, looking at 11 cells with fully functional lighting. In each cell, an inmate sat in darkness they couldn't escape. Darkness only they could see. Medical brought in specialists, neurologists from Little Rock, ophthalmologists from Memphis. They found the same thing: perfect eyes, perfect optical nerves, perfect visual cortex activity, but subjective experience of total darkness. Then we noticed the burns. During medical examination on day 6, inmate Chen showed unusual marks on his retinas. Burn patterns, the kind you'd get from staring at intensely bright light. Medical examined the others. All 11 inmates had identical burn patterns, precise, symmetrical, concentrated in the exact center of their visual field, like they'd all stared at the same impossibly bright source, but they claimed they'd seen nothing but darkness. How can you have retinal burns if you're in darkness? I asked Chen. He looked toward my voice. His eyes were open, but unfocused, lost. Maybe the darkness is what's burning us, he whispered. Maybe we're staring at something so bright it looks like nothing at all. The specialists had no explanation. The burns were real, measurable tissue damage, but the inmates experienced only darkness. We tried everything: different lighting, darkness adaptation, sensory deprivation therapy. Nothing changed. The inmates lived in what they perceived as absolute black. They navigated their cells by touch. They couldn't see their food, couldn't see their hands, couldn't see anything, but their eyes kept burning. On day 9, inmate Rodriguez started describing what he saw in the darkness. There's something here, he said during evening check. I can't see it, but I know it's here, standing in the corner, watching. What makes you think something's there? The darkness is different where it stands, thicker, like the black has weight there. Other inmates reported the same thing: presence in the darkness, something occupying space they couldn't see, something that made the black feel heavier in certain areas of their cells. I reviewed security footage. The cells looked normal, empty except for the inmates, but when I enhanced the video, I noticed something strange. Light levels in the cells fluctuated, subtle variations. The brightness would drop slightly in certain areas, then return to normal. The drops lasted only seconds, but they were measurable, and they matched exactly where inmates reported feeling the heavy darkness. Something was absorbing light in those cells, not blocking it, absorbing it, taking the photons and preventing them from reaching the cameras or the inmates' eyes. But what could do that? On day 12, the burns got worse. Medical reported that all 11 inmates now showed severe retinal damage, burns covering over 60% of their retinas, damage consistent with staring at something thousands of times brighter than the sun. But they still saw only darkness. "It's getting brighter," Rodriguez said. "The darkness is getting so bright I can't stand it." The statement made no sense. Brightness and darkness are opposites, but the burns supported his claim. His eyes were being damaged by something intensely luminous, something he experienced as pure black. The specialists theorized it was a perceptual inversion. Whatever the inmates were looking at was so far beyond normal visible spectrum that their brains couldn't process it. So it registered as absence rather than presence, as darkness rather than light. They were staring at something radiating at wavelengths human eyes can't normally perceive. But the radiation was so intense it burned their retinas anyway. On day 14, we tried an experiment. We put infrared cameras in Rodriguez's cell, cameras that could detect wavelengths beyond visible light. We wanted to see what he was staring at. The footage showed nothing unusual. Standard infrared signature, normal heat distribution, empty cell. But when we checked the ultraviolet spectrum, we found it. In the corner, Rodriguez said the darkness felt heaviest. There was a UV signature, something emitting ultraviolet radiation at levels that should have been impossible. Radiation intense enough to cause the burns we were seeing. But the source was invisible. No physical object. No explanation for where the radiation originated. Just empty space radiating light that could blind you. We evacuated segregation on day 15, moved all 11 inmates to the medical wing. Different cells, different lighting, different environment. It didn't matter, they still saw darkness. The burns still worsened. Medical placed protective shields over their eyes, special filters designed to block harmful radiation. But the inmates removed them, said the shields made the darkness worse, made the brightness unbearable. By day 20, 3 inmates were functionally blind. The burns had destroyed too much retinal tissue. Even if whatever was causing the damage stopped, they'd never see again. The others were close behind. I don't work in segregation anymore. Tucker Unit shut down that wing permanently, claimed structural issues. But I know what they found during the final inspection. UV radiation levels in those 11 cells remained elevated. Years after the inmates were removed, the cells still emit radiation at wavelengths we can't see, still burning, still radiating, still bright enough to register as darkness. The inmates are spread across different facilities now, all 11 diagnosed with permanent vision loss due to unknown environmental exposure. Workers' compensation claims denied. Medical explanations insufficient. But I've seen their medical records. The burns are still spreading, even with their eyes covered, even in standard cells with normal lighting. Whatever they stared at in Tucker unit segregation is still burning them, still so bright it appears as darkness, still watching from corners they can no longer see. Rodriguez sends me letters. Someone reads them to him and writes his responses. He says the darkness follows him, says every cell he's moved to becomes dark within days, says he can feel it in the corner, watching, getting brighter, getting closer. His last letter said something that keeps me awake at night. I understand now. We're not in darkness. We're inside the light. We're inside something so bright it swallowed us whole, and it's still hungry. I burned the letter, but I keep checking the corners of my own room, looking for that heavy darkness, that impossible brightness. I haven't seen it yet, but my eyes are starting to hurt. I never reported what happened during intake processing, but the drawings are still spreading. My name is Jennifer Walsh, and I have worked as an intake coordinator at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Tennessee for 9 years. My job is processing new arrivals, photographs, fingerprints, medical screening, property inventory, standard procedure that happens hundreds of times per year. During COVID lockdown in July of 2020, new intake was limited but continued for emergency transfers. We processed inmates from overcrowded county facilities into our isolation wing. The pattern started with the third transfer, inmate Collins, 26 years old, awaiting trial for armed robbery, no mental health history, no drug use, clean medical screening. 72 hours after intake, Collins entered what medical called a fugue state. I found him during morning cell check. He was on the floor, drawing with his finger on the concrete. No pen, no pencil, just his index finger tracing the same pattern over and over. A spiral, perfect geometry, precise curves starting from a center point and expanding outward in mathematical progression. The kind of spiral you'd need drafting tools to create, but he was drawing it freehand. Over and over, each iteration identical to the last. I called medical. They examined him. He didn't respond to voice, didn't acknowledge their presence, just kept drawing. His finger was bleeding from friction against the concrete. Dr. Hayes pulled him away from the floor. Collins immediately started drawing with the spiral in the air. His finger traced the same pattern, invisible but precise. Medical sedated him. He slept for 16 hours. When he woke, he had no memory of drawing, no memory of the spiral. But when they showed him photographs of what he'd drawn, he became agitated. "That's wrong," he said. "The center is wrong. It should be deeper. It should go down. Down where? Below, under the floor. That's where it starts. That's where they found it." "Where who found what?" Collins looked confused. "I don't know. I don't know why I said that." Medical logged it as stress-induced dissociation, isolation response. They cleared him back to his cell. 3 days later, inmate Park entered the same fugue state, drawing spirals, same pattern, same precise geometry, same obsessive repetition. When they pulled him away, he said the same thing Collins had said. The center goes down, below the floor. That's where they found it. I reported the pattern to the facility psychologist, two unrelated inmates, same behavior, same spiral, same impossible knowledge. The psychologist interviewed both men. Neither could explain the spiral, neither remembered drawing it, but both insisted the center was wrong. The spiral needed to go deeper, needed to penetrate beneath the surface. By week 2, 6 new intake inmates had drawn the spiral, all within 72 hours of arrival, all entering fugue states, all drawing the same perfect geometric pattern, all claiming it went deeper than what they could draw. I pulled the facility blueprints, checked the foundation beneath the intake wing, standard construction, concrete slab, rebar, nothing unusual, but the architect's notes mentioned something. During the original 1989 construction, they'd found something beneath the site. The notes were vague. Archaeological artifact removed and relocated. Foundation poured over excavation site. I requested access to the construction archives. They were stored in a county facility 40 miles away. It took 3 days to retrieve the files. The excavation photos showed what they'd found. Carved into bedrock beneath where Riverbend now stands, there had been a spiral, ancient, predating European settlement, carved deep into stone. Perfect geometric progression, starting from a center point that descended into a natural cave system below. The construction crew had filled the cave, poured concrete over the spiral, built the prison on top of it. But they'd photographed the carving first, documented it, preserved the measurements. The spiral the inmates were drawing was identical, perfect match, to the archaeological artifact buried beneath 60 feet of concrete and earth. 60 feet beneath the intake wing. The inmates couldn't possibly have seen the photographs. The archives were classified. The construction documents weren't digitized, no public access, but they were drawing it anyway. On week 3, the drawings changed. Instead of just spirals, the inmates started adding symbols, geometric marks around the spiral's edge, angles and lines that looked mathematical, purposeful. Dr. Hayes photographed the new symbols, sent them to the State Archaeological Department. The response came back within hours. The symbols matched markings found at ancient Native American sites throughout Tennessee. Spiritual markers, warnings, indications of sacred or forbidden ground. The translations were uncertain, but the archaeologist who reviewed the photos suggested the symbols meant something like descent point or passage below, warnings not to disturb what lay beneath. On day 22, inmate Collins stopped drawing. He sat in his cell, staring at the floor. Medical checked on him. He was responsive, lucid, but fixated on a specific point on his cell floor. "It's right there," he said, pointing. "Right beneath that spot. That's where it opens." Where what opens? The spiral, the real one, the one we've been trying to remember. Medical moved him to observation. But 2 days later, inmate Park started saying the same thing, pointing to a spot on his cell floor, claiming the spiral opened there. I checked their cells. Both were pointing to the exact same coordinates. When I overlaid their cell positions on the facility blueprint, the spot they indicated was directly above where the archaeological spiral had been found, directly above the filled cave system. 60 feet of concrete separated them from the ancient carving, but they knew exactly where it was. On day 25, inmate Rodriguez joined them, then Chen, then Morrison, then Williams, all 6 new intake inmates within their first 72 hours at Riverbend, all drawing the spiral, all entering fugue states, all pointing to the same spot on the floor, all claiming they could feel it beneath them, calling them, pulling them down. Medical ran every test: neurological scans, blood work, toxicology. Nothing explained the synchronized behavior. The inmates weren't communicating. They were in separate cells, no contact, no shared information, but they all drew the same spiral, all pointed to the same spot, all described the same sensation. Something below them, spinning, descending, waiting. I requested the facility be evaluated for environmental contamination, something in the intake wing causing shared hallucinations. Carbon monoxide, mold, anything. The tests came back negative, air quality perfect, no toxins, no shared exposure, just 6 men drawing a spiral they'd never seen, pointing to a cave they didn't know existed, responding to something buried beneath 60 feet of concrete and earth. On day 30, the spiral appeared on my skin. I noticed it during my evening shower. On my inner forearm, a small spiral, raised like a birthmark I'd never had before. I thought it was a rash, an allergic reaction, but when I looked closely, the spiral was perfect, geometric, matching the exact proportions the inmates had drawn. I scheduled a dermatology appointment. Before I could go, 2 more spirals appeared, one on my shoulder, one on my ankle, all perfect, all identical, all matching the archaeological artifact buried beneath Riverbend. I don't work at Riverbend anymore. I transferred to administrative duties at a different facility. The intake wing has been closed. They claim structural concerns. But I know what they found during the final inspection. The concrete above the archaeological site is cracking, hairline fractures following a spiral pattern. Starting from the center point the inmates identified, expanding outward in perfect geometric progression. The cave below is opening again, the spiral is returning, and the markings on my skin are spreading. I have 17 spirals now, all over my body, all perfect, all pointing downward, like my skin is trying to show me the path, trying to guide me down. The inmates are still drawing, spread across different facilities, none of them in contact, but they're all drawing the same thing. The spiral is getting deeper. Each drawing shows more turns, more descent, like they're mapping something that's growing, something that's rising from below. Last week I started drawing too. I don't remember doing it. I wake up to find spirals sketched on paper, on walls, on my own skin in ink I don't remember applying. Each one points down, each one shows the path beneath. And now, when I stand very still, I can feel it. That pull, that gentle rotation, like the ground beneath me is spinning, descending, carrying me down to whatever waits at the spiral's center, to whatever they buried in 1989 but never destroyed, to whatever is remembering how to call this home. There's a room in the security housing unit we're never supposed to enter without protective equipment. I learned why the hard way. My name is David Chen, and I have worked as a senior correctional officer at Pelican Bay State Prison in California for 18 years. Pelican Bay houses California's most violent offenders. The SHU is complete isolation, 22 and a half hours per day in an 8 by 10 concrete cell, minimal human contact, maximum control. During COVID lockdown in August of 2020, we converted part of SHU for medical isolation. Inmates with positive tests or exposure went into modified cells with enhanced ventilation. That's when the pressure incidents started. Cell SHU 47. Inmate Martinez reported difficulty breathing during his second night in isolation. Medical examined him. Vitals normal, oxygen saturation perfect, lungs clear, no respiratory distress. But Martinez insisted he couldn't breathe, said the air felt thick, heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. Medical attributed it to anxiety, isolation stress. They noted it and monitored him. The next morning, Martinez filed a grievance. Something is wrong with this cell. The pressure is crushing me. I checked the cell environment. Temperature normal, humidity normal, air circulation functioning correctly, everything within standard parameters. Martinez sat on his bunk, breathing heavily. When I activated the intercom, he looked at the camera. "You don't feel it?" he asked. "The weight? Like the walls are pressing in?" "There's no pressure change, Martinez. The cell is fine." "Then why do my ears keep popping? Why does it feel like I'm diving?" I logged the complaint. By evening, Martinez reported his ears were bleeding. Small amounts, just traces of blood from his ear canals. Medical examined him immediately. They found something impossible. Martinez's eardrums showed pressure damage, minor ruptures consistent with rapid altitude change or deep water diving. The kind of damage you'd get from experiencing extreme atmospheric pressure. But he'd been sitting in a cell at sea level for 48 hours. The environmental sensors showed normal pressure. 1 atmosphere, standard conditions, nothing that could cause the damage medical was documenting. By day 3, inmate Davis in SHU 49 reported the same symptoms: crushing sensation, difficulty breathing, ear pressure, blood. Medical examined him, same damage, ruptured eardrums, pressure injuries, impossible in the environment he'd been occupying. I requested full environmental assessment of those cells. Engineers came in with specialized equipment, barometric sensors, pressure gauges, atmospheric analyzers. In SHU 47 and SHU 49, they found anomalous readings. The atmospheric pressure inside those cells was fluctuating, not dramatically, just small variations. But the variations followed an impossible pattern. The pressure would spike to 3 atmospheres for 30 seconds, the equivalent of diving 90 feet underwater, then drop back to normal, then spike again 10 minutes later. But the cells were sealed units, no way for pressure to change that rapidly, no mechanical system that could create those fluctuations. The pressure was just changing, spontaneously, like the cells existed in different atmospheric conditions than the surrounding building. On day 5, Martinez's medical exam revealed bone damage, compression fractures in his ribs. Minor but measurable, the kind of damage caused by extreme external pressure, like being squeezed in a vise. The doctor was baffled. This is deep sea damage. This is what we see in diving accidents. Rapid pressure changes at depth. He's been in a cell at sea level, I said. Then his bones are lying to us. We moved Martinez to the medical wing. Different cell, different pressure environment. His condition stabilized within hours. But when we moved inmate Davis to take his place in SHU 47, Davis's symptoms worsened immediately. Within 6 hours, he reported crushing pressure. Within 12, his eardrums ruptured. Within 24, he showed compression fractures. The cell itself was causing the damage, not environmental contamination, not shared psychology. The physical space of SHU 47 was somehow subjecting occupants to pressure that shouldn't exist. The engineers tried to find the source. They sealed the ventilation, checked for gas leaks, measured the structural integrity. Nothing explained the pressure variations. On day 8, we left SHU 47 empty. No inmates, just sensors and cameras, monitoring and vacant cell to see if the pressure phenomena continued. It did. Every 10 to 15 minutes, the barometric sensors showed pressure spikes. 3 atmospheres, sometimes 4, sometimes 5. Brief surges that would kill a human if sustained. But there was nothing in the cell to cause them. Just empty concrete space, experiencing impossible pressure. Then the cameras captured something that made no sense. During a pressure spike, objects in the cell responded. A plastic cup on the floor compressed, flattened like someone had stepped on it. But no one was in the cell. A book left on the bunk compressed, the pages compacted together. The spine cracked, like tons of weight had pressed down on it. The concrete walls showed stress, hairline cracks forming and disappearing with each pressure cycle. Something was crushing the cell from all directions, squeezing it like a fist, then releasing, then squeezing again. The structural engineers measured the effect. During peak pressure, the cell walls moved inward by 0.03 inches. Measurable compression. The entire cell was being crushed and then returning to normal dimensions. Cycling, rhythmic, 12 times per hour, like breathing. On day 12, inmate Rodriguez was accidentally placed in SHU 47 due to a clerical error. By the time we realized the mistake, he'd been in there for 6 hours. We found him unconscious. His body showed advanced pressure trauma, broken ribs, collapsed lung, internal bleeding, like he'd been crushed. Medical rushed him to the hospital. They saved his life, but the damage was permanent. Compression injuries throughout his body. His bones showed stress patterns consistent with being subjected to 6 atmospheres of pressure, the equivalent of being 200 feet underwater for 6 hours. In a cell at sea level that was completely sealed, we evacuated SHU 47 permanently, welded the door shut, posted warnings. No one enters without authorization. But the pressure continues. We monitor it remotely. The sensors still register those spikes, still show impossible atmospheric conditions, still record the cell compressing and expanding with mechanical regularity. The engineers finally admitted they had no explanation. One suggested the cell might be experiencing pressure from a different location, like a doorway to somewhere deep. Somewhere the pressure is measured in atmospheres instead of altitude, somewhere that's trying to equalize with our space. I requested the cell's construction history. Built in 1989 as part of the original SHU expansion, the foundation goes down 60 feet, poured concrete, solid construction. But I found something in the geological surveys. Beneath Pelican Bay, there's a massive underground cave system, unexplored. The caves descend at least 300 feet below the facility, maybe deeper. The survey couldn't penetrate far enough to find the bottom. SHU 47 is positioned directly above the deepest measured point, where the cave system drops into unmapped darkness. The pressure in that cell matches what you'd experience at the depth of the caves below. The cell isn't creating pressure, it's channeling it. It's connected to something beneath us, something deep enough that the atmosphere pushes down with crushing force, something that's trying to pull the cell down to match its depth. I don't work in SU anymore, but I monitor the pressure readings. They're archived, public record if you know where to look. The spikes are getting stronger. Last month, they reached 7 atmospheres. Last week, 8, the equivalent of being 240 feet underwater. And the cycle is accelerating. Used to be 12 times per hour. Now it's 18, 20, 24, like whatever is below is breathing faster, getting excited, getting ready. Yesterday, the sensors recorded a new phenomenon. For 3 seconds, the pressure in SAU 47 dropped to 0. Complete vacuum, then immediately spiked to 10 atmospheres before normalizing. The concrete walls cracked during the transition. Permanent damage. The cell is structurally compromised. The engineers say if the pressure continues increasing, the cell will collapse. The floor will give way. Whatever is below will have a direct path up. I've started feeling it in my office. 2 floors above SHU, a slight pressure in my ears, a faint heaviness in the air, like the effect is spreading, like the connection between the cell and whatever lies beneath is widening. Last night, my ears bled. Just a little, just enough to notice. I checked the barometric pressure in my office. Normal, 1 atmosphere, standard conditions. But my eardrums show damage, minor ruptures, pressure trauma, like I'm being squeezed by something I can't measure. Something that's learning to reach beyond a single cell. Something that's slowly crushing us all. I never reported what the counts showed during that final week, but the numbers still don't add up. My name is Robert Hayes, and I have worked as a count coordinator at Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary in Tennessee for 7 years. Brushy Mountain closed as an active prison in 2009, but during COVID, we reopened parts of it for emergency quarantine overflow, temporary housing, short-term detention until county facilities had capacity. The facility is old, built in 1896, stone walls, iron bars, the kind of prison that feels haunted even when it's empty. We brought in 20 detainees on September 1st, 2020, standard count procedure. I logged each arrival, verified identification, Assigned cells, 20 inmates. Perfect count. That night, first official count showed 21. I recounted 3 times, checked the roster, verified cell assignments. The math was impossible. I'd logged 20 arrivals, but the cells held 21 people. I walked the block with Officer Martinez. We did physical count, visual confirmation of each inmate, cell by cell. 21 inmates, all present, all accounted for, all with proper identification and paperwork. But I'd only processed 20. I reviewed the intake video, counted each person walking through the door, 20 arrivals, no errors, no duplicates. 20 people entered the facility. 21 people were now inside. I reported the discrepancy to the warden. He ordered full recount. Every officer on duty counted independently. Every count came back the same. 21 inmates. We checked identities. All 20 original detainees were present. Names matched. Photos matched. Fingerprints matched. Every person I'd processed was accounted for. But there was someone extra. Cell B-14. An inmate I hadn't processed. An inmate with no intake paperwork. He looked normal, mid-30s, average build, wearing the same orange jumpsuit as everyone else. When I asked his name, he answered clearly. Thompson, Marcus Thompson. I checked the roster. No Marcus Thompson, no paperwork, no court orders, no transfer documents. Where did you transfer from? Thompson looked confused. I've been here since '92. You processed me yourself. I started working here in 2013, and the facility closed in 2009. Thompson shook his head. No, I've been here continuously. Check your records. Thompson, B-14, since '92. I checked historical records. In 1992, Brushy Mountain had housed an inmate named Marcus Thompson, cell B-14. He'd been serving 20 years for robbery. He died in 1995. Heart attack, buried in the prison cemetery on the grounds. The inmate in cell B-14 matched Thompson's intake photo perfectly. Same face, same build, but 25 years dead. I called medical. They examined Thompson. Vital signs normal, healthy adult male, no signs of death. When asked about his memories, Thompson described daily routine at Brushy Mountain from the 1990s, guard names that matched historical records, events that happened before the facility closed, details he couldn't have known unless he'd actually been there. But he'd been dead for 25 years. We kept Thompson in cell B-14, monitoring, medical observation while we figured out what to do. The next night, count showed 22. Another inmate appeared, cell B-7, no intake paperwork, no processing records. His name was Davis. Robert Davis. When I checked historical records, I found him, inmate at Brushy Mountain from 1988 to 1993, died during a work detail, crushed by machinery, dead for 27 years, but now occupying cell B-7, alive, breathing, insisting he'd never left. By the third night, we had 24 inmates, 4 more than we'd brought in. All 4 matched historical records. All 4 had died at Brushy Mountain decades ago. All 4 insisted they'd been there continuously. that they'd never left, that we were the ones who didn't belong. The count kept climbing: 25, 26, 28 dead inmates appearing in their old cells, occupying space they'd been buried out of, living lives they'd lost years ago. The warden ordered evacuation of the living detainees. The original 20 we'd processed, we moved them out on night 7, but the count didn't change. It stayed at 28. Because 8 of the original 20 inmates we'd brought in weren't showing up on the evacuation list. They disappeared, replaced by dead inmates who'd taken their cells. I checked the evacuation video. We loaded 20 inmates onto the transport, but when I cross-referenced identities, only 12 matched our original intake. 8 of the people we evacuated were historical inmates, dead prisoners who'd somehow replaced living detainees. And the living detainees who'd been replaced were nowhere. Not in cells, not in the facility, just gone, vanished into whatever space the dead inmates had left behind. On night 8, the count reached 32. On night 9, 38. By night 10, 44. The cells were filling with dead inmates, men who died at Brushy Mountain over its 113-year operation, all returning to their old cells, all claiming they'd never left, all counting as present during our nightly counts. The facility director ordered complete evacuation. No more detainees, no more staff. We'd seal Brushy Mountain and walk away. But when we did final count before closure, the numbers made no sense. 67 inmates present, all in cells, all accounted for, all with identification that matched historical records, all dead, some dead for decades, some dead for over a century, but all returned to Brushy Mountain, all occupying the cells they died in or died near, all waiting for count. I was the last staff member to leave. As I walked the block for final count, I saw them clearly. Row after row of cells, each one occupied, some inmates in modern clothes, some in old-fashioned prison stripes, some in clothing from the 1800s, all sitting on their bunks, all waiting for count, all looking at me with the same expression. Not hostile, not threatening, just patient, like they'd been waiting for years, like they knew I'd eventually understand. I counted them, 67, all present. Then I locked the facility and walked away. Brushy Mountain has been sealed since September 2020. Official records say structural concerns, unsafe conditions. But I know the truth. The prison never really closed in 2009. The dead never left. They just waited for someone to open the doors again, waited to be counted again, waited to reclaim the cells they died in. I check the security system remotely. The cameras still function. I can see inside the cell blocks. The count continues. Every night, automatic sensors track movement and presence. Last night's count showed 93 inmates. The prison only has 80 cells. They're doubling up now, sharing space. Dead inmates filling every available cell, and then overcrowding beyond capacity, still waiting for count, still insisting they never left, still looking for staff to process them. I got a call yesterday, automated system, voice recording from Brushy Mountain's old intake office. Inmate Hayes, Robert, report to intake for processing, cell assignment, B-1, you've been here since 2013. Time to be counted officially. I hung up, but the message was clear. They remember me. They know I worked there. They know I walked those blocks every night doing count, and they want to count me too. Last night, I found paperwork on my desk, intake documents, dated September 2020. My name, my photo, CELUS assignment, B-1. I never filled out those forms. I never processed myself as an inmate. But the paperwork exists. Official documents, proper stamps, correct signatures, like somewhere in Brushy Mountain's records. I'm already counted, already assigned, already waiting in my cell. I've started seeing it in my peripheral vision. The cell block, the iron bars, the stone walls, like they're bleeding through into my apartment. Like the space I occupy is slowly transforming into cell B-1. Tonight, I'll do final count before sleep. Count the rooms in my apartment. Count the doors. Count the walls. I hope the numbers still match what they should be. But I'm afraid I already know the answer. The count always comes up wrong at Brushy Mountain. And now Brushy Mountain is counting me.